That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Monster, the directorial debut of Anthony Mandler, which premiered at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival and is just now getting its release, courtesy of Netflix, May 7th, 2021.
It's written by...
it's based on, I believe it's a 1999 novel by Walter Dean Myers, who was... he wrote a lot of YA content. The script was adapted by Wiley, Janece Shaffer, and Radha Blank of the 40-year-old version. And somebody needs to update Ms. Radha's IMDb profile with this credit, by the way.
Oh, it's not in there?
No.
Oh.
Because I saw the credits and then I'm, looking through my notes and it's not on there. But yes, she did, was one of the ones that adapted it.
Nice. Okay. The story revolves around a young man named Steve Harmon, who's played by Kelvin Harrison Jr. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the basic story is he is arrested and charged with being involved in an armed robbery that resulted in the cashier of the bodega, which was robbed, being killed. Mm-hmm. So we watch him go through a year-long trial. Mm-hmm. And then it ends with the verdict, which is not guilty. And that's it. I mean, that's basically it.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
It starts with him getting arrested and then it ends with him being found not guilty. The film is told, it's narrated by Steve, mm-hmm. which we'll get into. And then we get flashbacks that attempt to show who he was as a person, but also shows the events leading up to the incident. And the big question throughout the film to the audience is, was he involved? Because he says right away, I'm not guilty. And throughout, just sort of implying that he had nothing to do with anything. But in the end, we find out that he had started to keep the company of a couple of questionable people, like people involved in illegal things. One is played by...
A$AP Rocky.
A$AP Rocky, and the other is Denzel Washington's son.
John David Washington.
Yeah. So these two, John David Washington's character is a little more he's presented as a little more thuggish maybe.
Sure, yes.
Like more of a career criminal, and then A$AP Rocky's character seems like a nice guy who's just also hustling. So those two with some other people plan on robbing this neighborhood bodega. And because Steve, who's kind of like a good kid, he's smart, he comes from a middle-class background, lives in Harlem, his parents are very involved, he goes to a very prestigious high school, so he just gets involved with the wrong crowd, and one day he bumps into them on the day they're planning to rob this bodega, and they ask him could you go check to see that the bodega is empty and then let us know if it is? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what gets him implicated, because he's on camera giving a signal which ends in the death of the cashier. And then the film ends with a question, and the question is, what do you see when you look at me? So I think that's where the title comes from.
Yes.
We're supposed to...
Well, because the prosecuting attorney classifies him as a monster.
Right. Okay. This was a very interesting story.
Yes.
It's relevant, it's timely, it's heartbreaking. At times it's kind of horrific, like watching this young boy get booked at the police station and being, put into jail, and it was just horrific to watch, and knowing that...
Well, how kind of Kafkaesque that process is.
Sure. So for that, I really liked it. What didn't work for me, I think... So one, the narration. So we get background that Steve, Kelvin's character, is in one of his extracurricular activities is part of this film club. So he's very into film. And we see him interacting with A$AP Rocky's character and filming sort of their interactions as if he were filming a documentary. He's also filming his little girlfriend played by...
Lovey Simone of Greenleaf and Selling the Spades and The Craft.
Yes. So his narration in the beginning mimics him reading a script. Mm-hmm. So he's interior, nighttime, blah, 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 that sort of thing. But it's not really consistent.
Memory. Yeah.
Because then sometimes it seems like he's just thinking aloud
sure.
or talking to the audience. That was a little off to me. And maybe more so than that, the film feels a little bulky because from the very beginning, I think it was obvious to me that he's not as innocent as he seems. So we get a lot of background that really doesn't support him being innocent. It's just him with this girl, which I think we did not need at all.
I think the Lovey Simone character could have been cut out completely. And I agree that it seems like we're spending so much time on trying to paint a picture of him as a human prior to the arrest, which doesn't really add up to much. Mandler, who has previously directed a lot of music videos, usually works with Rihanna. He's directed 16 of her music videos. And the director of photography, David Devlin, is also has a lot of experience directing music videos. And I get the sense that they were trying to have this kind of artsy aesthetic when really the cold hard light of day is really what is most provocative in this film, in the courtroom drama. That's where all the emotion and poignancy kind of comes out. Like Jeffrey Wright and Jennifer Hudson play his parents, but they feel very wasted. Like they're just,
they have nothing to do.
They're just kind of weighty names to add attraction to watching the film, perhaps.
And they do support the fact that he comes from a very sort of wholesome background and that he's not your average suspect. But Jennifer Hudson's character, I think, is a little miscast because she reads older. Like, she's very dowdy and matronly, and like she shows up one day to prison to see her son and makes him read some Bible scriptures. And it just read like someone, like I felt like she was acting more like she were his grandma.
Sure, but what doesn't help is we don't really have any other real establishing scenes with her, so that's kind of all we have to go on. So it seems I think that is a response, particularly in this community, to something like that. That makes sense, but since we don't really have any other sense of her as a woman.
So Kelvin Harrison Jr. I thought was really good in that film about the terrorist act.
Loose.
With
Octavia Spencer. Yes. Mm-hmm.
This film was filmed like 4 years ago, and he's younger, and I don't think this is his strongest acting.
So I was at that film festival, and he was in 3 films at that fest, and another one that is similar subject matter is called Monsters and Men, which also stars John David Washington, which has to do with racist police officers. John David Washington, I believe, is a black police officer and kind of dealing with the fallout with his family and that. I think we've seen him. I like Loose much more, but there are a lot of things that I think make for interesting conversation pieces. Where it gets really clunky is like Tim Blake Nelson, who is an actor and director that I also quite like. He is the film studies instructor, and he testifies in the courtroom as a character witness. But
is he in Men in Black?
Yeah.
He plays like an alien?
I'm not... That sounds right, but I'd need to double check. He's in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, works with the Coen brothers a lot. He directed O. Remember that Othello remake with Julia Stiles? A few other films I really liked. He's in The Good Girl with Jennifer. Anyway, he is showing the students, and this comes at the second portion of the film, Rashomon, the Kurosawa film, where which is a very film studies film to watch, but technically you usually only see Kurosawa references. It's either that or Seven Samurai. But it's so on the note. One, I would have been fine if it just had that, because that is a film about how a crime happens and then the rest of the film is spent showing what it looked like, the interpretation from multiple perspectives. Kind of like that film Vantage Point with Sigourney Weaver. And then they have a conversation about perspectives, which I think lends itself to be kind of heavy-handed.
Yeah. In general, I thought that character was too much, because the scenes where we see him prior to Steve getting arrested in the classroom talking about film, I thought the teacher was just one of those, it was very I'm a cool teacher and I'm going to sprinkle expletives in my lecture, and I didn't really, it was heavy-handed.
John David Washington, he's really good at playing kind of insidious characters. And this was about the time he did Love Beats Rhymes, which he's kind of an ass in that as well. But I did enjoy him on the stand.
He was okay. I thought A$AP Rocky's acting was much more appealing.
Was better than I was expecting, because I guess I don't know what I thought about him.
They're playing very different characters,
sure.
Yeah.
And then Nas is in there as somebody named Sunset, who...
I was so confused by his role, because he's one of the...
He's an inmate.
An inmate at the prison housing Steve. And at one point, because Steve is like, he has a scene where he says he's learning to starve himself so that when other inmates steal his food, he doesn't feel it. And then he's in distress because he feels like he's going to lose his case, so he has skipped mealtime.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow Naz's character just walks into Steve's cell with like a plate of food. And I for sure thought something sexual was going to happen because he hands him the food. Nas hands Steve the food. And then he goes, well, aren't you going to say thank you? And I was like, oh my God.
There's another scene with him, but it kind of goes by so quickly it doesn't establish anything.
But the thank you, what that he wants is genuine. And then he gives him a bunch of advice about like life and the system, which felt very like an addendum to something that I missed out on.
Right.
Okay, speaking of acting, I did like the lady who looked like Meryl Streep.
You say that every time. We've reviewed several films with her. Jennifer Ehle, who's an excellent actress.
Who I think is the lady from Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
I don't know.
But I know that she's not that person.
No, we rewatched Contagion at the start of the pandemic. She's the one that comes up with the virus. She's in Saint Maud. Remember with the girl?
Is she Saint Maud?
She's Saint Maud's patient.
Oh.
Remember the girl that immolates herself?
The older lady?
Yes.
The one who's bald?
That's dying, yes.
That's her?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
She's in a ton of stuff.
Well, I really enjoyed her.
She's always really good, and I do think she really elevates this from the emotional intensity of it is kind of helpful.
Well, yeah, her first meeting with Steve, when he's saying to her, like, do you believe me? Like, I'm not guilty. And she's like, I'm going to do my job. Well, and then at one point she tells him, you're wrong, you're black, and you're on trial. So that's what we're working with.
Yeah, she's not a white savior type. She's just very blunt.
She's very pragmatic, and she is... The performance she gives, but also that characterization, I really did feel like she was trying to do the best for her client.
Yes.
And it wasn't about whether she believed him or not. And I thought that was very well done.
The note I had on her was she's very flinty in this. But yes, I always liked her. And again, those are the best sequences of the film. And Jarrell Jerome, who all these people seem like Lovie Simone, Jarrell Jerome, Kelvin Harrison. Since we've seen them in so many things since this, they seem so much younger now that it's coming out now. He is from Moonlight, and we just reviewed Concrete.
Oh, that's right, Concrete Cowboy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I like to always say what I would have preferred the story had been. So what I would have preferred is, because this movie's long, the first 30 minutes be like this kid gets arrested. He goes through this year-long trial, found not guilty. Because at one point, Steve says, like, who would you have to become to survive 25 to life in here? And that's like, yeah, that's the better story. Like, this guy who has experienced this traumatic thing, like going through a murder trial, gets off. What would his perspective, since this film likes to talk about perspective, like what would his perspective be moving forward?
Right.
Because I think what the film could have also done in its, existing format was we start with the crime and then him being found not guilty, and then the flashbacks sort of build up to the truth of what happened. But it's kind of like out of sequence, and there's so much sprinkled in that I felt very disconnected to Steve as a character. Like, I never felt like he was wholly innocent. I felt like he was involved in this. He didn't pull the trigger, but he is an accomplice to this, like, armed robbery that resulted in a homicide.
But the justice system isn't able to kind of navigate that gray zone.
Right. So, and that's fine. I just wish that we could have maybe seen a section of his life knowing that he was involved in this thing and how is that going to affect him. That being said, that's not the movie we got. And it did provide great conversation afterwards.
Right, because, he does forsake A$AP Rocky's character, who's named William King, by saying that he's just an acquaintance, when he really was more than that to him. Yeah. But he, as even his lawyer saying, we have to distance yourself from these people. But he also was afforded a certain, privilege in aligning himself with them in the neighborhood as well.
Right.
So there are a lot of interesting things there that, yes, I would be interested in how he changed as a person afterwards, because surviving a trauma like that, can have a ripple effect, obviously, in many ways. And the kind of the guilt he probably would likely feel knowing what, he had to lie.
Yeah.
Which I believe that he made the right choice in doing so.
of course you would. I don't think anyone under those circumstances would be like, yeah, I know I'm being charged with something more lofty than what I actually did, but I don't want to walk away from this having not paid for something. Of course not. So I think this kid, it's just the way it was played and written. There was no chance for me to sort of... So, for example, when the verdict is read, you know, of course I'm thinking it's 50-50, and either way I wouldn't have felt anything. Like, if he would have been found guilty, it's like, well, I mean, you were involved, you chose to lie about the truth, which probably could have gotten you off. And then him being found not guilty, I also felt like, well, he shouldn't serve, 20 years in prison for just
even the deal that
being a lookout.
Even the deal they were talking about at the beginning for 5 to 7, it's like, that is too long of a young person's life.
Sure.
Because if we're going to believe the truth of the flashback as it's presented, is he was simply told to go look in that bodega and see what you see.
Right.
I mean, of course they're not asking for... There's something malevolent about their intentions, but as a 17-year-old who's not really thinking, who's easier to just do it, he learned to make a lesson.
This is what makes the film a great conversation piece. I just don't think as like a 2-hour, viewing experience, it didn't really take me on a ride. Sure. I felt much more exhilarated afterwards talking about it. And one could say that is like a thumbs up for this art. For that reason, I would give it a 3 out of 5. I would recommend it.
I would recommend it as well.
Yeah. Anything else?
No.
Okay, bye.
Bye.